Alright, time for another DraftPhysics.com video presentation. So we'll begin with a little conversation about the double slit and the real truth about the actual experiments and the actual results and what can be actually deduced. And it's really fairly simple. And then we'll play this preposterously silly, no doubt, video from conventional big degreed physicists who just talk absolute crap about what actually took place and what the truth is. So it'll just be one of those kind of videos, frankly. They're always silly, and they're going to prove their silliness reliability. It's going to take something that is really simple and make it insanely complicated. And because frankly, they couldn't be bothered really thinking about physics in any elemental way. They just have to keep making it into something bizarre. Anyway, so there's two patterns you can create using light and disrupting surfaces, let's say, slits or impediments, things that block the light. Okay, and one of them should be called the four-source experiment, and one is the two-source experiment. One slit and the two slit. But yes, if you accurately define what's actually causing the effect, then this isn't complicated. So they have some standard notion that light goes through these openings and is magically changed in some magical way by some magical stuff. And the idea is if I had these two slits in separate locations, they'll create a pattern, this simple pattern. Okay, now this is pattern depending on how wide you open the slit. If you open it very wide, you'll get lots and lots and lots, hundreds of these little things will be visible. And if you close it very narrow, it gets very simple because frankly the distance, okay, between the surfaces, which is in their math by the way, is really dictating how many of these things you can possibly have, because there's only a certain number of wavelengths of light difference inside of any surface. So if you think about the wavelength, blue light has lots of they're very close to each other, the little bits. You know, the photon is something like this. It's a little piece of code, a bit, dot, 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 and this is the wavelength. The distance between them is the wavelength, lambda. And that simple model works very well. There's no waves, there's a code, okay, a sequence, a pattern, and that is what a photon is. It's a pattern of impulses hitting a surface. Well, anyway, the number of those, the frequency, the period, okay, the number that fit in here is exactly how many you'll get out here. And you get them on a curved surface actually, because the distance is equidistant. So if you want to calculate it properly, you shouldn't use a infinite plane. You should be recognizing that the pattern is this. And that'll tell you, okay, the number here will tell you exactly how many there are in this quarter of a circle. And you can just multiply that times 2 and you got your answer, if the slits are the same width. And frankly, it also tells you this, dividing this distance by the wavelength, not only tells you how many they're going to be, it'll tell you a lot about this, and it'll tell you that you can understand exactly how the two sources are interfering with each other, in the sense that if this number, which represents essentially a distance from a fixed point, so if we draw straight lines from here to here and then here to here, you can sort of recognize that that would be a source, one of these sources. And if this is a whole number without a decimal, then you know you're going to have an on. And if it's not a whole number and it's heading for exactly a 0.5, then that would be an off, the center of an off. Okay, and that really tells you what's happening all the rest of this way. But anyway, so you can just think of it as two slits being merged, right? So I have two single slit patterns, and I'm going to slide them into each other you can understand that they're both creating this when they start, because there's only one distance. But when you merge them, you create these two new distances. This distance here, and this big distance here. And that is what makes this double slit pattern so distinctive, because this outside dimension, that is this large number of wavelengths, means you have very small nodes, I'll call them. And the short distance means you have a new source for these big, the big pattern. This is no light here. Let's understand there's a missing one there. And the more of these slits I add, you can sort of understand that there's more missing spots. So there's there's a missing spot every other node. In the case of 2 slits, if I make it 3 slits or 4 slits, I just keep increasing the number of places where there is no match, and there's an X, okay? And eventually I just get dots in very distant space if I add enough of these surfaces, essentially. And eventually that, because the surfaces get so wide, like a diffraction gradient, the maximum 2 slits, right? If I make a whole bunch of these things inside of a whole inch of stuff, you'd understand that, oh, they have lots of these wide dimensions, so there's dots you can't see anymore, okay? And they're really there. There's really light here, it's just that it's not in phase. And there's light going here, but it's not in phase. It's the bits are being sent to these locations, it's just not in phase. So anyway, you can just understand that when you slide these two patterns together, this plus this doesn't equal this, because this plus this is really creating this very wide distance, creating little nodes, short distance creating big nodes. It's 2 new single slit patterns. These 2 patterns still exist, this one and this one, but you've added these 2 new distance sources. And that really does explain everything. You can perfectly understand this is all about sources, and the surfaces are in fact scattering these bits. So they're sending them in different directions, which means different path lengths, which means they'll land on a surface at a different phase. And so a bit from here ends up being this, and then a bit from here could be this one, and a bit from here could be this one. So the photon is a composite. You're breaking the photon, scattering these little bits, and the fact is you have a 50-50 chance, okay, of putting them back in phase or knocking them out of phase, tending towards phase or tending away from being in the proper wavelength sequence. The photon can tolerate being a bit off, but once it gets past a certain point, then it's off. It doesn't work anymore. It's not a visible photon. It won't do to the surface what you need it to do, which is create electricity for you to see it. And so this really is the surface experiment, the Young drawing, okay, of 2 slits with 2 waves coming out of them. Doesn't get the right answer, okay? Because guess what? The distance that matters is this center. This center. That's what their math has said. Their location of the wave is the center, and frankly, that's not what they've just created, because by creating a very tiny slit, they've wiped out this envelope pattern, and they're just getting the one widest opening pattern, and that happens from here and here. So they don't have it from the right location, so mathematically they'll not really be correct, and they don't really analyze this stuff, so they don't even notice those kind of defects. But they really just, by making the surfaces very, very close to each other, they essentially annihilate any capacity for there to be any wavelength of difference, any phase change. And without the phase change, they can't create a pattern. So only 2 of the surfaces are creating a pattern. The narrow surfaces aren't doing anything, and the only surface there is the surface, this impediment distance and this distance. Anyway, so Yeah, so there doesn't need to be much else to be said. The double maxima is really just two nodes overlapping. So because this is two different sources, in a sense, you're saying even in a single slit, it's two sources, this source and this source. The two sources, okay, are interfering with each other instead of superimposed on each other. This is this is coming out this way, this is coming out this way, this is 1 millimeter, and the two are just overlapping. And so that's why you have an overlap of the real pattern, because the pattern really started over here, in the sense that if this is an off, you know exactly what this is going to be. If this is a half off, then this has to be a half of a, the sequence is fixed by this number, and whether it's a whole number or a half number will tell you. And so all that really happens is this gets a little bigger or a little smaller, depending on whether it's a whole number of your distance. If your distance is, say, 15.5, you're going to get a different, subtly different central maxima than if it's 15. Alright, so I don't think there's much else to say. The wave doesn't work mathematically. It's inaccurate, and they have to fix it by, basically cheating, okay, and adding to their center of their wave in their mathematics. The only way they can fix this problem is they definitely have to fix the idea that they have identified the distance of the surfaces incorrectly when they use two waves. And the single wave obviously doesn't work at all, right? You put a single slit, I mean, their model of a single slit is crazy, right? We know this is what it does, okay? It doesn't create two waves, and they mathematically break it in half even though there's no break. It doesn't happen in water, so let's understand water waves don't make single slit patterns. So it doesn't work at all in the single slit because they're missing what is in their math is this distance, right? So they know the distance between the surfaces is in their math, and yet they pretend it's about one wave when no, it's about two surfaces. Alright, so with that context, leave us play the nonsense. And it's all just nonsense. It's 100-year-old, 200-year-old nonsense. And they've never thought about it, never considered, are we on the wrong track? They just keep reciting this propaganda, this fable about Jesus and walking on the water and loaves of bread and all kinds of nonsense. See if our volume is correct. Probably don't need quite as much. And turn off this annoying captioning.
You'll see that the same interference pattern appears, even though...
I jumped through the video. I didn't watch it, actually. I just jumped through to see the images. Yeah. Alright, so this is the Premier Institute of Quantum, wackolia. And it's just so bad.
You may have heard that light can act like a particle and like a wave.
Yes, I've heard it, and it sounded silly, and it sounded really silly, frankly. It's either, the universe is either made out of these bits of discrete momentum moving in patterns, or it's made out of some wooey ether stuff that's jiggling like jello, and it's doing it because the source of the energy is little jellyfish. So yeah, you either believe the silly story or you believe the one that's rational and sensible. But you people are suggesting you can believe in both.
It can bounce off a mirror like a particle, and it can bend and spread out like a wave.
So it doesn't bend, okay, it deflects. The light doesn't curve, it never does that. Even though they say it does, right? The Eddington experiment says light's bent, curved by gravity, but they don't really have any evidence of that. It's just a story they tell.
For instance, when it passes through a prism.
Yeah, it's a prism. It's a bunch of atoms, a bunch of slit experiments, frankly, a bunch of things for the photon to hit electrons. Now, I didn't add that part about how it works, but the electron's basically on its surface. You can sort of understand the electrons are going back and forth. They're going into the substance, out of the substance, into the substance. So frankly, if you're a photon, you can, something's moving this way and you come into it this way, what's going to happen is a combination is going to happen. And you're either going that way or you're going to go that way, depending on whether it's moving in or moving out. So the momentum is going to be exchanged with the electron with each individual discrete bit. Each little bit of the photon is going to perhaps hit an electron and it's going to be moved in a new direction. That's pretty much the simple story.
With careful experiments, we can see how light waves can...
So they don't really do careful, they do convoluted and for their purpose experiments. So they never, ever show us it taking 4 times the fuel to go twice as fast, even though it seems like, gee, in 350 years you should be able to show us that one. And they also don't show us simple pictures of images where we get to see, okay, the light as a consequence of this gravitational bending. It's a 5-minute experiment from space with 400 times better resolution. They could even create a nice motion video of it happening, and they don't do that because it doesn't happen.
Interfere with each other. But
so more nonsense about photons, which demonstrate in every single experiment that they never interfere with each other, never touch each other, can't bang a laser into a laser, can't bang photons into photons, can't be done. And the only way you can do it is have them hit particles of dust or particles of something. The only way you can see a laser beam is to put smoke in the environment or some sort of other, humidity, something for the photons to hit and deflect into your eye. Otherwise, it's all perfectly straight line mechanics.
did you know that particles can act as waves too?
La 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 la. Rays are waves. I mean, this is just sort of a wave versus ray theory. So you could say 400 years ago people would draw the sun with little lines coming off of it, and other people would draw the sun with little waves coming off of it. And we haven't really advanced the subject, and they're just basically saying it's somehow both, which is really silly.
This is one of the central ideas in quantum mechanics.
Right, so their foundational experiment is easily demonstrated to be full of woo and nonsense. They couldn't be bothered actually dissecting the experiment accurately and describing it accurately, and to create a whole pile of other crap they make a mess out of. So the simplest experiment they can't do right, and you people generally think these people should be trusted in things that are much more complicated. So they can't make right assumptions about something almost as simple as just going outside and kicking a ball, and they can't describe that experiment accurately, and you trust them.
Everything has a wave nature.
Some more bullshit made up by mathematical equations that don't even make sense, and create things like antimatter, complete wooey ideas. There's no reason to think matter is a wave. None at all. No good reason.
Light, particles, and even, in an unobservable way, macroscopic objects like baseballs and people.
Yeah, in a way that they'll never show because it doesn't happen. And, it's just not the truth. A baseball isn't a frequency. It isn't a wave. It isn't any of those things. It's a big clump of elemental matter, electrons and protons, and they just happen to be moving in a direction, and that's it. They're not doing it at a frequency.
One way to see the wave nature of light is through diffraction. The way that light...
deflection. It would be the simple word, or reflection. The fact is, the bits of the photon have to hit something. They hit something, they go in a new direction. If the thing they're hitting is in some randomized field of millions, and some of them are doing this, and some of them are doing that, and some of them are doing, then you're going to end up with a mixture of outcomes that's going to look just like scatter. There's going to be some going this way, some going that way. It'll all go in all directions because of the fact that you have a variable of the circumstance of the impact. The impact isn't just one, always the same impact, because the electrons can be in different modes of travel. They can be going out or going in.
Light bends around the sharp edges of objects, or
So the light doesn't bend, it's just scattered by an object. So it's like Compton scattering. It's just a simple process of combining the momentums. The photon has momentum, the electron has momentum. The pieces of the photon will hit the electron, just pieces. A regular photon is thousands of atoms of polarization and their wavelength. It's thousands of atoms of distance. It clearly isn't hitting a single photon. The pattern, dot, 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 is not hitting a single electron. Each bit, each dot of the photon hits a different electron, if it's going to hit an electron at all.
creates patterns when passing through narrow gaps. In the double slit experiment, laser light passes through two slits in a wall.
Okay, so that's a weird way to draw a laser, frankly. And these are 1 millimeter across, let's understand. Okay, and this classic drawing doesn't get mathematically correct answers. So let's just understand that the real points, the real surfaces that are actually going to create the double slit pattern are the outside surface and the inside surface, those 4 points. Now, if you make the slits infinitesimally small, that means really close together, then there are no wavelengths of difference between these 2 bottom points or these 2 bottoms or the 2 top surfaces. There's no wavelengths of difference possible. Therefore, there can be no pattern created, because the 2 are essentially one point source, and that one point source would be the distance from the middle of this and the middle of that. Okay, if they were to be honest about wave mechanics, the center of the wave would have to be the distance. But they measure the distance from the outside surface because, frankly, to their advantage. So it's a single slit pattern from that point source difference, because these 2 points are essentially the same location. So you end up with a single slit pattern, not a double slit pattern. You've changed a 4 source into a 2 source, because 2 of the sources aren't distinguishably different from each other. There's 2 headlights so close together over here, and 2 headlights very close together over here. You only have 2 headlights that you see. But if I separate these, then you'll see there's 4 headlights. It's sort of that simple.
And spreads out like a wave as it passes through.
So it doesn't do any of this stuff. And then you can do a radar experiment where you have a source coming from this side, or a radio experiment. You can have the source coming from this side and a source coming from this opposite side, where they can't interfere with each other. They can't touch each other. They don't know each other's exist. And you put your antenna in the middle, and you can create exactly the same pattern, because the bits from this side will in fact jam the radio signal. And you'll have places where the signal is in phase, and you'll have places where the 2 signals are out of phase, and the radio can't distinguish which one it's supposed to see. So it sees neither. And you'll get exactly the same on-off pattern. The 2 sources don't interact in space, so there is none of this destructive, constructive mishmash.
The waves coming.
It proves the pattern is created on the surface. It proves that it is not made in the space. That's what the radar experiment proves.
From each slit interfere with each other, creating a pattern of light and dark spots on a wall on the other side.
Right, so they're calling this the double slit experiment, but completely destroying. Let's just understand, she's going to draw a single slit pattern over here, even though this is supposed to be a double slit. And the only reason why they're doing this is because she didn't say it, but the slit is smaller than the wavelength of the light. And if you make it smaller than the wavelength of the light, there's no dividing the wavelength into the number isn't going to give you more than a 1. And without more than a 1, you can't possibly have, if you only have one node, you don't have any pattern. You have to have more than one to see a pattern. Okay, so it's that simple, the cheat they've done. So why the hell is that still there when I turned it off? That's a problem. Okay, it's really broken. Well, I better pause and see if I can fix that. Alright, seems good enough. Alright, so let's understand. She's going to show you, okay, a double slit, but she's made the slit so narrow, that's what they have to do, and she's ended up creating a single slit pattern. So she's just going to draw this pattern. See, they can't explain either this double maxima in the center or these missing spots here. They can't explain in their wave theory why those things exist. So they in every way try to avoid having to display such patterns because they can't explain them. But this simple analysis of two waves is completely inaccurate. What they've done is it'll annihilate two of the surfaces and basically convert a 4-surface experiment into a 2-surface experiment. And so she's just going to show a single slit pattern. So she calls it the double slit, but it's really not a double slit because she just wiped out two of the surfaces by making them too close together. So she's just going to describe a single slit pattern again and call it a double slit pattern when it really isn't. It's not a 4-source pattern, it's a 2-source pattern. She's showing a 2-source pattern and calling it a 4-source pattern. These are mistakes, you know, scientists shouldn't be making. This is all messed up. Yeah, I'm not going to try to fix that now. I'll just move this over here or something. Alright, continuing. Hopefully. Press the button. Okay, I'll press the button.
Side. This happens because when two crests or
So she's just showing again a single slit pattern. The double slit pattern is distinctive, has the double maxima in the envelope, and then a bunch of individual little dots, okay, in the interior of the pattern. And they have no explanation for that. And that's the real double slit pattern. This is a single slit pattern, again, because they've obviously made two of the sources, the surfaces, so close together that they can't be distinguished as two sources. They're not far enough apart.
two troughs of a wave meet, they add together, but when a crest and a trough meet, they cancel out.
So it's just an on-off pattern. You're just really saying, did you remake photons? Did you put them in the right sequence, in the right phase? This is just a phase diagram in the sense that the light you see is because the photons are arriving at that location from a distance, and that the distance means that it's a whole number of wavelengths of difference in the distance, and so therefore they're back in phase. They're back in the proper dot 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 sequence. And where it's black is crap is still landing there, the little bits, but they're not in the right sequence. They don't do what they need to do, which is hit the surface with a specific frequency to cause a bit of electricity.
But what if instead of laser light, you throw particles at the wall?
So this is more of a lie in the sense that that's not what they do. They're not doing the same experiment. It's just absolute bullshit, frankly. The electron experiments are not just put a couple of slits in front of it and shoot electrons through. It doesn't happen that way. It happens inside of an electron microscope, and they basically aim the electrons. Yeah, they aim them, which you're not supposed to be doing. But anyway, it's just, you can't call it anything but a lie. I mean, it's just a lie to say what if, and then describe it as if you're going to do the same experiment and you're doing a completely different experiment.
If you have a powerful electron beam, you can see that instead of two spots directly behind the slits, or randomly distributed spots.
So again, they're just totally ignoring the fact that these are surfaces. Now with electrons, the real problem is they're charged. So how could anyone even imagine an electron traveling through a slit without being affected by the surfaces? The surfaces are covered in electrons. Obviously, No electron is going to go straight through that mechanism. It's obviously going to be scattered all over the place. So it is no surprise that the electrons would be deviated in their path.
An interference pattern will appear, just like with the...
Yeah, it's not just like, it's distinctly different, and again, it's not a double slit pattern. So again, you have two openings, you're claiming it's a double slit, and clearly you're just getting a single slit pattern. So again, it's just more canard, more distraction from the truth, more lying.
Light. The electrons are behaving like waves.
No, they're really not. They're behaving like little charged balls you're throwing into an obstacle, a charged obstacle. No surprise that they deviate in their path.
And interfering with each other.
No, they're interfering with the surface. They're interfering with the fact that there's material that you're passing them through. And every time you pass an electron by any substance, it's going to react, because the substance can't help but having charge.
Even weirder, you can slow the
There's no weirdness here. There's just none at all. All right.
experiment down and send one electron at...
Right, indicating that this has absolutely nothing to do with your theory that they interfere with each other. So, and indicating that this is something else. But the truth is they can't do this single at a time thing. It doesn't really happen in photons ever. Okay. And you do need, actually, for there to be energy hitting you need energy hitting all the surfaces at the same time to actually recreate a photon. So it's impossible to do it with photons without, okay, there being more than one photon in the experiment at a time, because there has to be energy at all the sources, or the sources aren't on, and therefore you can't rebuild a photon because you don't have enough pieces. But let's understand, they don't do this experiment by shooting single anything. They put filters in front of it. And what is a filter? A filter is a bunch of slit experiments, essentially. I mean, a filter is a bunch of obstacles they put in the way to wipe out most of the photons. So you really are still creating little bits shooting from all different directions out of the filter. And you will have a probability that some of those bits will actually arrive at a surface in the right sequence, but you decrease that probability. But it has nothing to do with how much light is actually still getting through, which is still substantial. You're not really doing a single photon experiment. And this was proven by Veritasium, who tried to do it by filtering the light and allowing the experiment to run over a very long time to see the photons, because they were coming in individually, and it didn't work. And so when he shortened the experiment from 5 hours or 50 hours to 5 minutes then the experiment worked. And right, what happens if you're just shortening the time of the experiment? It means you're increasing the intensity of the light, and you're just basically guaranteed that there are more than one photon in the experiment at a time. So this is really easy to dissect, and the fact that nobody's willing to do any of this critical thinking is bad on you.
at a time. Each electron will pass through and hit the wall at a single point. But over time, you'll see that the same interference pattern appears, even though no other electrons were passing through it.
Right, so they say that, but it's really not true. But the electron experiment, as stated, is completely different. So the individual electrons are being scattered. No. But this isn't a parallel to photons at all, because photons aren't a clump. They're made of clumps. Photons are made of quanta, as Einstein would say. Energy quanta.
At the time to create interference. Apparently, each electron is actually interfering with itself. This is the crux.
And so this is the crux of baby talk and goo and woo and why the hell have a brain, because this is, as a premise, is just so ludicrous. It interfered with itself. I mean, what the fuck? I don't even know what to say. This is just Jesus raised the dead kind of story. This is just Sasquatch all over again. It's terrible physics. Terrible science to even say such a thing when you have absolutely no evidence there is even such a thing as interfering with yourself. I mean, come on. It sounds really stupid, and your description of it is even stupider.
Of wave-particle duality. Even something we think of as an individual object, like an electron, has an essential wave-like nature and acts as a wave.
It just doesn't mean anything. Yeah, it acts like it's everywhere when it's not. Okay, that's just silly. So that's all they've done is created an abstraction based on some notion that the electron doesn't have a fixed position in space. It's not in three-dimensional space. It's some kind of woo space, and in woo space it's everywhere they decide it's convenient to allow it to be. And then they just create this fake diagram and these fake interactions. But it just doesn't, like I said, you can always find that the flaw in it, and the flaw is the math explicitly shows the surfaces to be the relevant distance, and in fact your wave has a different center than the surfaces. The waves aren't being made on the surface, so unless you can figure out how to make a wave on the surface, it's not wave mechanics.
Wave when it's moving through space. The particle nature only appears when it's observed or measured. On the quantum scale, though,
So more baby talk about how something isn't what it is until we observe it, and it's just too human-centric baby talk nonsense crap. It didn't happen unless we show up to watch it happen. So until humans were on Earth, to use an Einstein pun, the moon didn't exist. Come on. Just bullshit. Alright, I guess I should just throw in the fact that a surface isn't a flat surface, okay? So physics knows that the surface is there's air molecules going into my hand, there's hand molecules going out of my hand, it's a whole bunch of stuff moving in terms of the atoms, and there's even more stuff moving in terms of the electric concept, the electrons and the protons on the surface. And so it's a very active area, and it's the simple explanation. You're saying there's an effect happening to the photons. Why wouldn't you blame the one place there's a lot of activity, which is the surface? So again, everything points to the surface, the entire logic points to the surface, and you have a key ingredient, which is surfaces are really active. It's the perfect thing to blame. Perfect. So understand all of the diffracted light, all of the fringe pattern, all the light that doesn't go straight through at a millimeter's distance is all light that somehow is scattered, okay? And it's scattered by the surfaces.
Very small particles, that essential waviness fundamentally changes how particles interact with each other.
So it doesn't do anything. The simple mechanics works, Newton's mechanics works. You just have to tighten it up because, yes, in 200 to 300 years we've learned a few things in terms of understanding electrons and protons, and that they're the essential active players in all of physics. They're the essential elemental matter, and they are affected by field of what is essentially a bunch of little active bits of quantum energy, and it can be in the form of heat, it can be the form of some sort of photonic energy, either in phase or not in phase.
And it means we have to develop new ways to think about and work with the subatomic world.
So they have a whole religion, smoking urns, little popey $10,000 booties, the whole works. They have a whole bunch of quantum computery bullshit, a bunch of frozen this and high pressure that, and a bunch of mush, and all of it's premised on completely flawed and false ideas. It's all garbage. It's a Tower of Babel.
And in some cases, particles acting like waves can change the face of the cosmos itself.
Yeah, so more just absolute rubbish. Oh, so this feminism thing is happening. So the women are just as dumb as the Homer Simpson men they're trying to emulate. And they're doing just some more technically stupid and flawed physics. Kind of disappointing, frankly.
All particles have a wave nature, which is super convenient for me because
Oh yeah, it's super convenient to have a silly thing to start with, and then I can make up sillier stuff, and I can use all the colors in my crayon box, and it's just so much fun. Ugh, fuck.
the particle that I study is super, super small.
Yeah, super small. There's only there's only three things, right? But it's 2 + 2 + 2 physics, right? Two kinds of force, two kinds of elemental matter, electrons, protons, plus, minus, and two kinds of interactions. You bang off of it and reflect, or you're absorbed. Period. That's all there is. It's really simple. The universe is really simple. All of this wooey crap is just that, a wooey, crappy religion. They might as well be talking about volcanoes and aliens, and it's just Scientology all over again. It's just a wooey sci-fi novel. That's what they've turned science into.
If you can try to envision how much smaller an electron is than a baseball, my particle is that much smaller than an electron.
Oh, look at that. Fuzzy dark matter. Hypothetical. That's your particle. It's a fun little unicorn. It's a unicorn. This is a gremlin, a pixie. Pixie, I study pixies. I'm a nuclear physicist and I study pixies. Pathetic. I'm sorry, this is pathetic. God, there's nothing to do but, play taps and bury this turd.
This means that its wave is huge, enormous, on the size of galaxies.
The little thing has the biggest wave of all.
So it's something that would actually be visible, and that's exactly what I study in my simulations of fuzzy dark matter.
Oh, brother. Dark matter, already ridiculous. And now they're going to give it fuzz? Oh, god damn, I just hate this planet. How did I end up on this fucking planet of shit-brained frickin' religious kooks? They just can't let it go. Everything has to be a woo theory.
Which is one possible explanation of dark matter, this mystery of missing mass in our universe.
There's no missing mass in the universe. You just don't understand how galaxies work.
Wave-particle duality applies to everything.
Okay, it doesn't apply to anything because it's complete mush. It's complete fable. There's no gremlin pixie duality. It doesn't happen.
If you like, you can even calculate the wavelength of a fastball.
Right, and it's going to be a meaningless number just based on mass and velocity, frankly. And yes, it's meaningless. There is no frequency, because guess what? Frequency isn't energy. I mean, it's a true fact that if I have a baseball thrower, and it throws one baseball a second, and then I throw the baseballs exactly the same, but I throw one every 1/10 of a second instead. That in the same space, there's going to be 10 baseballs in one instance and only one baseball in the other instance. So clearly there's more baseballs. But the baseballs don't have any more energy.
But it'll be much smaller than a proton, not nearly enough to blame for a strikeout.
So that made nothing sense there at all. A strikeout. Oh, God. Probably should never even watched a baseball game. Anyway, so they just keep, even though I've explained the truth, they just keep doing this, but it is hilarious, right? It's so bad. They just keep telling the same stupid fable over and over. And they keep thinking, oh, I'm educating you. I'm explaining this new phenomenon, right? And everybody who's watched any physics videos at all already knows about this. So this is all just such redundant rubbish. Alright. God, I'm just so depressed. Yes, the observer being the observed. I just had a thought. If sending one particle at a time produces the same effect, then the particles sent as a stream still aren't interfering with each other, but with only themselves. Yeah, that's their theory. A little bit too silly. This may sound weird, but it can get weirder. What happens if you only use one slit? Oh, that's right, you don't get any waves, and the whole thing doesn't work. And it's a big lie to talk about interference, because frankly, with one slit and only one wave, you can't have interference. So there must be two waves. What's causing the two waves? Oh, maybe it's the two surfaces. The interference patterns will appear too. It will take longer. It doesn't take any longer, so that's just a joke. Ha ha ha! And it will be more smeared out. Smeared out. What is it? Oh, you mean the nodes will be bigger if the slit is smaller, and the nodes will be smaller if the slit is wider. Gee. See, they haven't even figured that out. Since we can make photons from both electron and positron, so again, just absolute, from electrons and gremlins, and protons and, whatever, fairy princess, fairy godmother, and reverse the process, it would be fair to say that whatever they are made of, they are interchangeable, whatever. Okay. Let's see, wait, I always thought electrons were considered point particles. They consider everything a point, which is part of the ridiculousness also, because things have actual dimensions in the universe. Somewhat in line with the infamous double slit experiment, this, as I understand, having a single barrier with two closely spaced side by side vertically. Yes, isn't that funny? The single impediment creates the same thing. So what does the single impediment have in common with the single slit? Oh, surfaces. Two surfaces. That's what it has in common. Thank you for blowing my mind. Blah, blah, blah. All this tripe. And all these morons. Fuck. Oh, you didn't see any of that. Ha 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 ha. Good. You don't deserve it. You should see it, actually. I don't know. It's blipped out first. I don't know exactly why it's not working, but the thing isn't working. Let's see, quantum episode 1. I should be able to turn that on. Oh, it's partially there. Okay, so I just did some comments. But anyway, you didn't miss anything. There was no illustrations that you missed. So I guess that'll be it for the video. Don't know what to say. Like I said, there will not be anybody who will take the first 5 minutes of my video and show how I said something that's false and incorrect. And the fact is, the whole experiment is perfectly dissected as a particle experiment. Particles work perfectly if you understand a photon to be a composite object made of things at a period in space. A 1 mile long radio wave, for example, is not a particle that's a mile long. It's just the separation between the bits. Okay, and that's it. It's not a wavelength. It's a period, or it's a frequency. How often does the event of a thing happen? Alright, so that really is enough. Alright, so till the next time and such, I'll go see if I can get some antidepressants. Because it's It's just so dismal. How, again, I've made these arguments. I think I've perfectly explained how a simple answer does solve it. There should be some response saying, yeah, right, they really are just guessing, and they're making really bad guesses. And they're clinging to, bad guesses that are hundreds of years old. I mean, the Young drawing didn't get a correct answer for 200 years. For 200 years, the D is the wrong D. It doesn't get the right answer. And they couldn't care less. I mean, that should bother you if you are at all science interested. Science should be credible. It should be exact. It should be careful. It should be all these important things, and you don't demand that it be any of those things. That sucks. The world sucks because you suck. That's what it really comes down to. The human race deserves, the slop it exists in, because it really just couldn't care less to fix anything that's broken. Alright, so until the next time and such.